I think it's the key question because AI, machine learning, will never answer the question why.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to NeuroPsyQ, and thanks for joining us again. Today, we have the immense honor to be joined by Dr. John C. Lennox, who's a mathematician, bioethicist, and author. In the book 2084 that he authored, he actually uses some of his mental power to tackle some of the most challenging topics in today's society, such as where we come from, ethics, and the implications of artificial intelligence on humanity. I have the book with me now. It was a great read. He's debated many high-profile scientists, such as Richard Dawkins, and we couldn't be more excited to have him on our channel. Today, we're going to be talking about some of the ideas and themes found in his book, 2084, and the future of our civilization as we continue to adopt more and more powerful machine learning systems in our daily lives. Welcome to the channel, Dr. Lennox.
Thank you very much indeed. It's a pleasure to be in Toronto, even though it's cyberspace Toronto.
It's a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, so one of the things that I did, I know during the last 15 or 16 so months during the pandemic is I took on reading and I tried to read diversity. It's something that we are always told as kids, but I've put it off for about 20 years. So I thought I'd start following the advice. And as our viewers know, one of the things that we study in our lab is application of machine learning and AI. So I thought it would be prudent to read some of the books published by the great thinkers in the field regarding this topic and the future of AI and humanity. And I think I read most of the ones out there that are in the kind of popular space, including Life 3.0 by Max Tegmark. And while they're of course very visionary and thought-provoking, and I suggest many people read them, one of the themes that I kept seeing is that there's this very dystopian view that once we hit so-called singularity, where the ability of AI to reprogram itself and make smarter and faster versions of itself, really paint this kind of dystopian view where the role of humans in this planet Earth diminishes, and we become either slaves or transition to some sort of bionic silicone versions of ourselves, which I found quite, I guess, disturbing, given that I'm a new father of two young boys, with high hopes that they're going to have a meaningful and happy life. So thankfully, I came across 2084, and I think it raised some very different themes that were not found in some of the other books. So hopefully we can touch on some of those today.
Well, I'm very glad that you found it encouraging, and congratulations on the two boys. How old are they?
One just turned 5 months, so he started rolling, and the other one is around 15 months. So
oh, fantastic. Wow. I've got 10 grandchildren.
Oh my goodness, that must be a handful. But I think that's what we want to talk about today. Is I'm sure they bring you so much joy and happiness.
That's right.
And the idea of trying to replace them with an app or a bionic computer dog is at least for me doesn't sit well.
It doesn't sit well with me either.
So hopefully, yeah. So hopefully we'll talk about some of those interesting concepts today. And we always encourage our readers, do your own research, read 2084, read some of these other books, and really formulate your own opinion about what you want AI and what role AI you want to play in your future, because I think that's one of the kind of key questions humanity needs to answer moving forward.
Yeah, I like that approach. I entered public debate really on these topics with a view to giving people information, and told them, and I still do, to read widely and make up your own mind. I'm not here to make your mind up, but I would like you to see that there may be other aspects to this that you haven't considered. So that's a very good motivation.
That's one of the things I liked about 2084 too, is that it wasn't just you sharing your own ideas, but obviously you've read a lot of different books, you've read widely yourself, and you've incorporated that into the book. Things like talking about Sapiens and other books that have been written, and taking the views of those authors and contrasting them with their own helps people diversify their thinking themselves. So that's a very important thing that I think you incorporated into your novel.
Thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, I guess just to get us started, I think one of the early concepts in your book that I really liked is that with regards to technology, we're developing more and more sophisticated tools, such as canoes, and then we evolved to boats and steam engines and airplanes, where it's becoming increasingly easier to go places. But perhaps I think some of the questions that we all come across is, why are we going here? Why are we going to the places that we're going? And I think I sometimes felt that the last few years, just because it's so easy, you don't need to necessarily put in the effort to plan a vacation. You can kind of build it in 5 minutes online. Do you think that's a increasing problem in our society? And if so, what are the implications for people to find purpose and meaning in life?
I think it's the key question, because AI, machine learning, will never answer the question why. And that's the question that people want answered. They're searching for meaning and purpose. They've got a huge amount of data that they're incapable of processing, but they don't find meaning and purpose in it. The late Jonathan Sacks, who was chief rabbi of the United Kingdom and a brilliant thinker, once made the statement, and I think it may be due to someone else, a thinker centuries ago: the meaning of a system will not be found inside the system. You have to look outside. And certainly no science in that sense, in the sense of the natural sciences, gives us meaning, and it doesn't give us transcendence. We have to look for that elsewhere. And it's very interesting from the perspective of the philosophy of science that really great people like Sir Peter Medawar, who won the Nobel Prize, he said, look, science is wonderful, but it's limited. It cannot answer the questions of a child. Where do I come from? Where am I going? And where's the meaning of my life? And he pointed out that you have to turn to literature, philosophy, and I would want to add theology and so on to find answers to those questions. So we're faced with extremely and increasingly powerful technology, but it's not answering any question why, except in the very limited sense, as you, I think, were hinting at, that if I'm a bright young person, I can find a career in artificial intelligence and even in neuropathology, and that can motivate my life, but it doesn't answer the ultimate question. I love the ancient Greeks, they've taught me a great deal. They were extremely clever, so that's why I'm honored to be addressed by two Greek people today. And they asked questions of two kinds, mainly. First of all, what are things made of? And they were quite good at answering that, and we still are in material science. But the question that fascinated them was, what are things made for? And I often, when I lead seminars, I say to people, suddenly surprising them, I say, look, what were you made for? And there's absolute deafening silence. They have got absolutely no idea if there's a purpose for a human being. Now, artificial intelligence consists of artifacts, things that we make. And we are ontologically superior to things that we make. We're not ontological intellectually superior to things that we beget, like your two children, because they're made in your image. But my perspective is we are ontologically superior to any machine, any combination of computer systems and all the rest of it, however powerful, because we're made in the image of God. And we can actually do things that machinery, almost by definition, isn't capable of doing.
Yeah. In your book, you also mentioned that talking about the purpose and what is the purpose of being here on Earth, you mentioned that human beings are workers and we need to have some sort of job. But with the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen a lot of unemployment and lack of things to do. And many jobs during this time have been permanently canceled. And there's a lot of mental health decline coming along with that. Do you think that in the future with AI, if we have AI taking on the roles of jobs we used to do, people will be experiencing things similar to the pandemic where there's a loss of mental health due to a loss of jobs?
Inevitably, any industrial revolution creates, at least temporarily, a loss of jobs and employment. It can increase the pleasure of some, for example, developing machinery to do mining, took children out of the mines, and that was a very positive benefit, as you can see. But you're hitting on a huge problem, actually. I was in South Africa a couple of years ago talking about artificial intelligence, and this was the first question they raised. And they say, people tell us, but we'll be able to find jobs in these areas. But they said, we do not have the infrastructure and education to train people, even if they are intelligent enough, which many of them are, to do such jobs. Mm-hmm. So there will inevitably be a recalibration of jobs. And you know as well as I do that the spectrum is very wide. Harari talks about a huge jobless population and almost people who are useless as far as the workforce goes. And that's serious, as you say, for mental health, because believing as I do, that we're in the image of God, God gave us work to do. And if we don't have work to do, we feel there's something wrong with us and we need enormous help. So creativity on the part of job designers and job creators is going to be very, very important. The ability to create jobs for other people is a very special gift. And it's not one so much that I as an academic possess. So I'm very grateful for people who do that. You hit on a huge question. It's got a very big ethical dimension as well. And I don't think there are any easy answers to it. And doubtless, there has already been a lot of suffering, particularly not simply through the revolution in the technology, but through the pandemic.
Yes, even in my hometown, when they just added to the supermarket the self-checkouts. So now the whole supermarket is manned by one employee, whereas before there'd be like 5 or 6 of them in there.
Yes, I know. And that's very tough to come into the supermarket one day and be told, sorry, we don't need you. And the number of jobs that is going to be automated in the future is absolutely huge. But there's a lovely statement by a professor, I think his name is Ng, I don't know how to pronounce it, of Stanford, who said, if something takes a human a second to think about, over a second to think about, you won't be able to automate it. Now, I don't know what evidence he has for that, but there are all kinds of jobs that will not be automatable, but repetitive work will be. And I understand that lawyers, for instance, doing fundamental work that they charge a lot of money for, like conveyancing a house and so on, a lot of that will be processed by machinery. writing wills, all that sort of stuff. So there's going to be a huge recalibration. That's why we're going to need very intelligent people in our governments who have got real sympathy for those that can't find jobs, and we'll be dealing with a major unemployment crisis. But estimates of just how much people will be effective go up and down all the time. I haven't seen the recent ones, but they went way up and then they dropped down. So it's a bit hard to say.
Mm.
I think a lot of these predictions are also tough. I think trying to blend some of these themes that we're talking about. What exactly is our goal? And I think that's what I want viewers to really ask themselves. I think you touched on it with the ancient Greeks, that they were able to say what was in front of them, but answering what is this for is a much more difficult question. And I've seen a number. That's probably the most profound thing that I've seen in some of the books I've read is whenever someone mentions that, you kind of draw a blank stare. What are we optimizing for? And I think that's the challenge with artificial intelligence, is that usually we're optimizing for one specific parameter, and whether that parameter is the ideal kind of definition of humanity or not is questionable. I think one thing that I heard in some of your other YouTube videos is that you tell a story of I guess a similar situation, but different technology. When there was conflict in Ireland, your dad was running a store, and he made the difficult decision to, I guess, employ. Tell me if I'm mixing up this story, but my understanding is he employed people from both sides of the conflict, and that seems like a very honorable and right thing to do if you ask a young child. But obviously, as we grow older, we can predict that that's going to be a very unpopular decision for adults. And if I understood correctly, that led to some bombings that almost endangered some of your own family members. That's a very difficult thing.
It is a very difficult thing, but you hit on something very important. You say people react blankly when they're asked the question, what are they for? It's similar when you ask the ethical question, who said so? I'm so interested in this that I actually did a degree in bioethics, and it was very clear from various areas where ethics applies very importantly in business and medicine, in academia. Nobody wants to answer the question, who said so? What is the authority for your ethical base? Now, you're quite right about the story. My dad employed both Protestants and Catholics. Why did he do that? Because he had a transcendent base for his thinking. And what that was the statement in Genesis that God made human beings, male and female, in his own image. And it's very interesting listening to another, I think, inhabitant of Toronto, Jordan Peterson, talking about Genesis. I was fascinated to hear him say, he quoted that statement and he stopped and he said, man, this is the basis of civilization, of civilized life. We ignore it at our peril, that we have this transcendent meaning, being made in the image of God. And that's what people are desperate for. If we are made in the image of God, then it stands to reason that if you expel God from the equation of life, which we might call it for a moment, that you're not going to get any satisfactory conclusion. It's like finding your stomach hungry and you're in a world where there's no such thing as food. If you denied the existence of food, and if there was none, you'd starve to death. And I think we are dying in a very real way because we were built with eternity in our hearts, and nobody much is supplying it intelligently. And that's the business I'm in, or try to be in, is to awake people to that there is actually the fact that we long for these things ought to be like our longing for food and so on, ought to be evidence that there's somewhere in the world there is something that will satisfy those desires. And that's one of the reasons, not the only reason. And you're right when you say that artificial intelligence, the stuff that works, that is narrow AI, tends to just deal with one thing and does it very fast and does it very well. But you can't specify a human being in one simple formula or equation. And it's not going to deal with human beings. It's going to deal very well with simulating one aspect of what humans can do and help us in doing that. Whether we'll get much further than that is an open question.
Yeah, so I guess in terms of advice to younger people, encountering these questions for the first time, how does one prepare, I guess, themselves to find purpose? And going back to your father's courageous decision, how does one prepare to, when they're confronted with these difficult decisions, maybe not make the most economically or mathematically correct decision from reducing harm, but making the choice that ought to be done by a true human being? How does one prepare for those types of difficult decisions in life?
By, in the first place, realizing that every person has a worldview that they believe. And some people are surprised when I point that out. They say, no, we don't have a worldview. Yes, you do. All of us have a set of answers, whether they're thought out or partially thought out, to the very big questions of life. What's the meaning of life? Is there life after death? Is there a God? Etc., etc. Those sort of questions. And what is very interesting to me is that there are only really 3 families of worldviews. First of all, there is theism, where I sit. There is a God who's created the universe independently of himself, but and has created us in his image. Opposite that, there's atheism, as represented by Dawkins, whom you mentioned, where there is a universe, but there is no God. And then the third one is pantheism, which is somewhere in the middle. In other words, the universe exists, the gods exist in some sense, but they are the universe, and it's an impersonal entity. Most people, and it's very interesting in a seminar when I say, which one are you in? And they say, oh, I'm a skeptic. I say, yes, you might be a skeptic, checking things out from a distance, which is what skeptine means in Greek, I understand. But you will sit in one of those 3 families, and people are surprised when they do. That is, they sit in a belief system. And therefore, come back to Socrates, my favorite from ancient Athens. The unexamined life is not worth living. We need to examine our worldviews. And that's what I've spent my life doing. Not simply examining the Christian worldview that I represent, but examining other worldviews in order to find answers to my own. And I would set younger people on a tour of inquiry, of listening, of going to other people and asking them, what makes you tick? What are the things for which you live? What brings you meaning in your life? Now, this is a hugely enriching thing. I do it still myself. In other words, I follow the wonderful Socratic method of asking questions. When I was young, I was taught I had 2 ears and 1 mouth, and I should use them in that proportion.
That's very good advice.
Yeah, it's a wise thing indeed. My dad always encourages the Socratic method, to ask questions and listen, and not shy away from other people's opinions, but rather, like you said, try to learn as much as you can.
That's
I was
right.
actually speaking with Peter Hampson from Oxford as well, who's a theologian there, and he had a very similar perspective on the matter. But just like how our opinions are subjective, you mentioned in the book that morality is also subjective. So steering the conversation back to the AI, would its morality, do you think, depend on the creator or the algorithm used? Would its morality also be subjective?
Well, what I think I said in the book, or hope I said, was not that morality is subjective, but that it is worldview dependent.
Mm.
And that's a very different thing. I would argue, in fact, that all of us believe in objective morality. I've never met a sane person, at least, that believes that torturing infants is wrong. We all believe that there is truth, peace be to the postmoderns, and that there is objective morality, which, as the great philosopher, atheist philosopher J.L. Mackie of Oxford once said, once you see that there is an objective morality, that's actually a very good argument for the existence of God, but that it's worldview dependent. That's the key thing. And when it comes to AI, and especially artificial general intelligence, which raises questions about the nature of human beings, if I'm a naturalist and you say to me, what is a human being? Well, I'll say an unborn, say, human being is a mass of undifferentiated cells. And if I then wear my Christian hat, I'd say, well, there are the cells, but this has all the potentiality of a person made in the image of God. And therefore, that makes a huge difference on the way in which you evaluate or answer the question, what is that fetus worth? What value does it have? And the same is true at deeper levels of humanity. And we need to face that beliefs have consequences. And one of the reasons I reject atheism as a scientist is that one of its consequences is not simply to devalue human beings, but it's to devalue rationality. And as I hope a thinker and a mathematician, I'm not very impressed with arguments that devalue rationality.
Kind of on a similar theme. One of the most profound things I found in your book is kind of along these lines is this idea that it's ancient people and people from the past valued mortality and being mortal very different than we do today. And I think the example you mentioned in your book is when you look at a religion like Christianity, you have an almighty God who's immortal and perfect, who comes down to earth and takes on a mortal life where there's death involved, there's suffering. And you even see that with ancient people in some of these Greek mythologies where you have an almighty Zeus. He has a son, Hercules comes down to earth and starts doing human things. So I thought that was very interesting because when you read some of the kind of AI books today, there's an obsession with immortality. How can we take what's in our brain and transfer it onto a hard drive and disseminate it throughout the universe so we live forever? What do you think is this kind of switch in human, I guess, behavior and value that has shifted from a kind of a mortal life on universe to an obsession towards immortality?
Well, I actually think that obsession is as ancient as human beings. The desire to be God, and Harari has got it in his book Homo Deus, the desire to be as God. And Genesis 3 starts that off with the story of the temptation in the Garden of Eden, where the humans were told falsely that God wanted to suppress them, and they needed to disobey him in order to increase their potential and be as gods and know good and evil. And humans have been doing that ever since. And it has led, the idea of humans being God has led to the 20th century being awash with blood, basically. It's absolutely horrific. And when people come along to me talking about the hope now that AI is going to solve the problem of human mortality, as Harari suggests, he says it's agenda item number 1 for the 21st century is to solve the problem of physical death. And agenda item number 2 is to enhance human happiness by bioengineering, cyber technology, cyborgs, all the rest of it, drugs, implants, anything you name. And I find that sadly amusing in the sense that I tend to say to these people, if I want to shock them a little, I say, you're too late. They say, what do you mean I'm too late? Well, I said, at the heart of Christianity is the claim that God has become human. And you're thinking in the wrong direction. You're thinking of man becoming God, but God has actually become human. But the purpose of that becoming human was not to crush and destroy human beings, as in some AI scenarios, but the exact opposite. And I said the problem of physical death was solved 20 centuries ago in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And I said the amazing thing, when I contrast my message with your highly speculative message, is that Christianity teaches me that Christ died and rose again so that if I trusted him, I could receive a new kind of life, which is imperishable, and that one day I would be raised from the dead and would live forever. So that solves both your problems. It's the greatest upload that ever was put across to human beings, that there will be a resurrection of the dead. Now, of course, that flies right in the face of naturalistic thinking, but it doesn't fly in the face of rational thinking, as I've tried to show in many books.
Yeah, thank you for, that's a lot to think about, that's for sure. Okay, just in the interest of time, Christina, do you have any final questions or thoughts for Dr. Lennox?
I guess the final question I'd ask is, because I know probably a lot of people my age might be worried about AI coming in and, taking over the world or taking all our jobs. But do you have any words of optimism for the children of the future and that you'd like to share with them?
Well, I would tend to point out AI may well be powerful, but it can't do everything. And that goes back to Alan Turing, that AI uses algorithms, but there are things that humans can do that are non-algorithmic. And that's hugely important because some of the most interesting and meaningful aspects of human beings are not algorithmic. Creativity, for example, sentience, consciousness itself. We don't even know what consciousness is, let alone can simulate it. And therefore, none of those things, I think, is going to be dented for a very long time, at least, if ever. And I would repeat what I said at the beginning, that abstract thought, imagination, critical thinking, creativity, and so on are things that human beings have been gifted with. And to quote the CEO of Microsoft, who said, look, computers are never going to be creative. Computers can surprise us, like the famous program for AlphaGo, but surprise is not the same as creativity. And when we think of things that require consciousness, like empathy and love and joy and so on, I am very impressed by people who are not necessarily Christians, like David Chalmers, who's an expert in this area, very strongly inclined towards materialism. But he says reductive explanation of consciousness is impossible. So I think there's going to be a great deal of space for the things that are really human. And remember what I said earlier, we are ontologically superior to things that we make, not things that we beget. And your two children and our friends and children and relatives have got, by God's gifting, something that AI, though it may simulate to a certain extent, will never reproduce in actuality. Representation is not the same as reality.
Yes, and I think just a final thought on that. I was interested, I know a few years ago they mentioned about AI creating music, which seems like something that should have been able to be accomplished by now with the feats of AlphaGo. And I found some AI generated songs on YouTube, and although they had some sort of familiar changing of tones and beats, obviously we haven't seen them kind of break the top 40 kind of rankings yet. So I do agree that what's scientifically possible in describing things and what is creatively possible are two different domains. And hopefully there's some optimism there that as long as we don't become computers by focusing too much on the objective aspects of the world, and also bring in things like music and arts and spirituality and drama into our lives, it'll be very difficult to be replaced, I think, because in essence, humanity is a continually evolving and subjective thing in life. It's not all objective. So,
well, I leave you with a quote from a very intelligent pioneer in computer theory. And he wrote a wonderful paper. And the title of the paper is this: "The word artificial in artificial intelligence is real."
there you have it.
There you have it. So thank you very much, and lovely to meet you.
Thank you, Dr. Lennox, for making the time, and I hope you and your family are safe as
And
the
you.
pandemic is winding down.
Bye-bye to both of you.
Bye. Thank you.
That's all for today's video, everybody. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed our conversation with Dr. John Lennox. I really encourage you to pick up his book, 2084. It's really thought-provoking and mind-opening. Like we said in the conversation, try to read as broadly as possible, keep your views diverse, and be open-minded and receptive to other people's opinions. Because through conversation and through listening, we can learn. So, as Dr. Lennox said, use your mouth and ears in the proportion that they were given to you. Thanks for watching. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. We'll see you next time on NeuroPsyQ.